Okay, this is Andrew Morrison from AM Bid, and it's my first live stream. So welcome to this. I'm really excited about the opportunity of getting to do LinkedIn live streaming, and I've got lots of experience to share and expert tips on bidding and tendering. So today, for my first LinkedIn live streaming, I've chosen the subject of what your bid responses need to contain in the COVID-19 era. So I'm going to cover quite a number of things that it's very important that as a bidder, as a contractor, as a supplier, you're actually giving comfort and assurance to the buyers, to the clients, to the evaluators, to the on your organization that can be trusted to deliver goods and services on behalf of the client or for the client in this changed world that we're all living within. So I'm going to talk about perhaps around about 15 different elements that it's my recommendation that your bid responses cover in some way where you've got opportunity to do so. While many of the bids that we're involved in at AM Bid are to the public sector within the UK, we also get involved in private sector proposals as well. But the public sector buyer is very interested in making sure that there is, number one, financial stability of the bidder. So there's no doubt about it that many organisations have taken a real haircut because of COVID-19. So the buyers are going to be evaluating your financial strength as an organisation and also your risk of business failure. Now, traditionally, the way that they've done this is by looking at accounts and looking at credit ratings as an example. So in the accounts, they're usually going to want to look at the last 2 or 3 years of accounts. In there, they're going to apply various tests. For example, they're going to look at asset ratio, where they're looking for a figure usually above 1.0. They also sometimes ask about the levels of working capital that are available. And of course, they're going to look at your credit rating via the credit rating agencies as well. So credit rating agencies that typically the public sector, as an example, and the private sector too, they use organisations like Dun & Bradstreet, like Experian, like CreditSafe, just to mention several of the ones. And what they're looking for is a good credit rating. They're looking for a low risk, or perhaps medium at the outside, risk of failure of the business. They might also look at how quickly you're paying your suppliers as well, because particularly if you're a larger contractor, perhaps taking on public sector contracts, they are looking at fair payment terms for your suppliers and subcontractors as well. So membership of the Prompt Payment Code, for example, could be good for you here. But focusing on going back to your accounts now. So imagine a situation that you're a business that your financial year ends on the 31st of March. So certainly your accounts for the year ending 31st of March 2019 will have been submitted. But that's a long time ago now. You know, that is nearly 18 months ago. And of course, the pandemic has meant that the tectonic plates that we were all standing on, these have changed quite a bit. So what is your organisation like now? So what is it like, for example, for the financial year that ended March 2020? Are you able to accelerate the submission of your accounts to Companies House? Because that would also give the buyer a little bit more comfort. But of course, although things started to bite in March, it was really in April that we started to see and onwards the major effects of the pandemic and the consequent economic downturn in so many sectors. So what's the story with your organisation financially? For example, what is your working capital now? Have you been able to access some of the government-backed loans, for example? What are your lines of credit like? What are your payment arrangements like with both your suppliers and also your customers or clients? So there's quite a lot there. So if I was sitting in the buyer's seat at the moment, I would probably be wanting to see some evidence of your accounts, more recent accounts, management accounts, budgets perhaps, cash flow projections. As yet, we're not seeing a huge amount of evidence that the public sector is really deep diving into this. But I would suggest, particularly for the buyers that are on this stream, that they really think about this as well, because you don't want to be caught with the next big company or small company failure, because the company failures end up costing your organisation as well, where you have to re-procure or you have to appoint an emergency contractor. So let's imagine the situation that you're in a strong position as a contractor. You are financially robust. You had reserves before COVID. You have been able to continue doing some work. You still have money coming in. You are not in a position that is causing a great concern financially. Well, this is where you might want to get a bit clever and ask some clarification questions to the buyer during the process, asking about what due diligence measures they're going to be taking to make sure that the successful bidders are going to be financially robust and have the necessary funds in place to see out this contract. So that may prompt the buyers to do a little bit more digging, and it may even result in other bidders being asked for more information or even excluded. So the mandatory pass-fail criteria has obviously got to be looked at quite closely here as well. So the next point I'm going to talk about, the second point, the second thing that you need to be considering within your bids is obviously health and safety. So health and safety, particularly, for example, in things like the construction sector, is always a very, very high priority. But it's now a high priority really in all sectors. So when you're talking about your goods and services, you need to be talking about what measures you have put in place to deal with the risk of COVID-19. You would want to be talking about, for example, what physical distancing arrangements that you might have in place, what welfare arrangements for your staff, sanitisation, etc. But also, if you're delivering goods and services that are going to be impacting on the public, or for example, building users or social housing tenants, or the general public, because you're maybe going to be working on behalf of the public sector, then you need to be really clear with your health and safety arrangements. Your risk assessment method statements are going to be really important, and that you can evidence that you are working in a COVID-19 secure, safe environment as much as you possibly can, and that you've minimised risk both for your own staff, but also for your client, for their staff, for their service users or residents, and also for members of the public as well. This, of course, is particularly important if you're delivering services, for example, to the NHS, if you're delivering services to perhaps elderly or health vulnerable clients, perhaps in social housing, sheltered housing type of arrangements as well. The third element that I'd like you to think about is capacity planning, because there's no doubt about it that COVID presents some unusual situations for us. So, how strong would your business be, for example, if quite a number of your staff went off sick? How would you be able to deliver the service? Also, how could you perhaps over-deliver? So the chances are with many goods and services contracts, there may be a bit of a backlog because work wasn't able to be done during the lockdown. And particularly for the public sector, this is very important. They have annual budgets and they want to spend them. They have service users that obviously need services, and some necessary things have been delayed, and they'll want to get these programs back on track. So how are you perhaps able to evidence, for example, you could be a house builder, a developer, are you able to do more than the 8 to 5 or 8 to 4 Monday to Friday if it's safe to do so? You may be able to work in different shifts, for example. For people, it's important though that people do not overwork and that they get proper breaks as well. But definitely being able to accelerate your delivery for some of the contracts could be quite important. Not just important for the client, but important for your organisation as well, because it could be a way that you can get an additional revenue that perhaps does something to fill up the gaps that you would have no doubt had during the extreme lockdown period. Lockdown brings me on to another element that you want to consider is further lockdowns. We don't like to think about this, but we have already seen them in some towns and cities, for example, Leicester. So if there was to be maybe a localised lockdown or hopefully not another national lockdown, but if that did happen, perhaps during the autumn or winter period, and perhaps running in line with some kind of flu epidemic, then how would you be able to work your way through that safely? So that's something else that you want to bear in mind. The next element I'd like to talk about is materials supply. There's no doubt that the lockdown has impacted on this quite severely. So you might be available to do the work, your workforce might be available to do the work, but in many contracts you also need supplies, materials as well. Now, what's happened to material supply? Well, in many cases, factories have been on lockdown as well, and the supply of materials has slowed down quite a bit. It takes time to get things restarted, to get these supply chains back in place and moving well. So important if your contract involves supplies, that you're able to evidence that you've got good supply chains in place and that you have perhaps alternative suppliers for some of the key things that you really need to be able to actually do your work. Environmental considerations comes next, and this has grown in importance. The buyers we've found over the last few years have been increasingly focused on sustainability issues, and they want to see the evidence that you've got, that you're minimizing waste, for example, that you are journey planning as much as possible, and coordinating your activities so as your impact on the environment is as light as it possibly can. Now, of course, if you've got something like ISO 14001, where you've got an environmental management system in place, then that and operating that effectively will certainly help you to evidence things that you're doing there. But also you want to be thinking about how things have maybe changed around some of the meetings that are going on. And that you are able, your staff perhaps working remotely, and how that is working out. Now, we're seeing evidence that many organisations are saying, well, our staff don't have to come back to the office if they don't want to, or we're certainly not going to ask them back during 2020. So things like that. But while that is great from an environmental perspective, you may also just need to give thought to the other aspects that brings into play. So it could be that you're in a business that really does work better if people are together face to face and working in a collaborative manner like that. So you would want to certainly burnish your environmental credentials, but also give enough assurance that the way you're working is not one that is going to adversely impact the delivery of the goods and services. And of course, there's many sectors and subsectors that you have to be face-to-face and sometimes together with other people to actually get things done. Innovation is something that buyers are very interested in seeing within your bids. They're interested in seeing the use of technology. So, for example, in construction, modern methods of construction and off-site are particularly of interest, but also robotic technology. Is that able to be used within your service delivery? What about artificial intelligence? It's important as well that if you're talking about innovation, that the innovation very clearly produces perhaps efficiencies. Does it produce efficiencies in terms of time or in terms of cost? Then making sure that that is carried through. There's no use in saying our use of technology and our innovation means that we're 15% more efficient. If your prices are 15% more expensive than the next bidder, then that doesn't really make sense. So yeah, it has to run through your bid. If you're making a play of your efficiencies, then your costs should also be less than an equivalent competitor. That brings me to social value. Social values call different things. So in the private sector world, it's often called CSR, corporate social responsibility. In England and Wales, it tends to be called social value. In the public sector, in Scotland, it's called community benefits. But whatever you call it, whatever you dress it up as, it is giving something back, usually to local communities, because you've got this contract. So this is becoming more and more important. The idea of local jobs, local apprenticeships. It's thought that typically recessions tend to hit the young worse than any other sector, than any other age group. So what are you doing or going to do if you get this contract in terms of guaranteeing that you're going to be providing apprenticeships, local jobs, opportunities, assistance to local charities perhaps, and support for community organisations. Now, a lot of charities and community organisations have seen a big dip in their revenues coming in to support the important work they're doing during the pandemic. So how can you help them to remain viable? And it's important also that you try to match up what you're doing with what's important to your client as well. It might be that your business has got a favourite charity, but if that wouldn't mean very much to your client, then you might perhaps want to think about a dedicated fund that you're going to use if awarded this contract in a way that actually would resonate with your buyer here. I'd like to talk next about client meetings and the importance of client meetings. Now, do they need to be face-to-face, or are you able to actually do these virtually, as so much has been getting done? So it's important that you understand what is going to work for your client as well, and important that they have the necessary arrangements in place as well, and are comfortable if you're going to do these virtually. And of course, we've all seen the very large productivity benefits of doing things virtually where it's possible to do so. Some other things that are coming up: you should have a risk register, and you should be grading your risks in terms of their probability and also their impact. It's important that there's risk owners and risk mitigations in place. Now, what sort of things? I've mentioned quite a number that would probably be in your risk register already, but we know that in just about 5 months' time, the current trade deal that Britain has with the European Union comes to its end. So before that, we're obviously interested to find out what the new trade deal is going to be. However, if there's no trade deal, or one that is not advantageous either to the UK or to your particular sector within it, then we think about things like at the Brexit referendum. We know that just after it, the currency markets, UK sterling went down. So if that happens again, what that means is that costs go up of anything you're importing from anywhere in the world. So what impact would that have on your pricing? Now, it might be that you've got to price in some of these risks into your contract if you're bidding just now on a multi-year contract. So you might want to look at what the change control provisions are within the contract and ask questions during the clarification period about that as well. We know that also the access to European national labour has been affected. There are less European nationals coming across to the UK, and also there's going to be new rules around who you would be able to bring in, or who your company might be able to sponsor to come in. So if you've been heavily reliant, for example, on European Union national labour, then you need to think about how you are going to present within your bid, how you're going to still give the client the necessary assurance that you're going to be able to provide their goods and services, even if there is quite a severe dip in the availability of European national labour. Another thing that might go in your risk register is a second Scottish referendum. The polls at the moment indicate that the SNP are in, let's say, pole position to win the May 2021 referendum, sorry, May 2021 election in Scotland. If that happens, there is probably going to be another Scottish independence referendum. So if you are a Scottish-based business, you might want to think about what that means for the delivery of your goods and services. You might also want to think, if you are based elsewhere in the UK, but bidding for a national contract or bidding for a Scotland-based contract, how that might impact on your delivery of the goods and services there as well. So again, there might be additional costs involved. So you just need to make sure that you've got that factored in as well. It'd be worth saying that there are concurrent risks. So you might get a few of these things happening all at the same time. You might get a localized lockdown at the same time as maybe a not very favorable trade deal, at the same time as something else happening perhaps to your costs of delivery. And you might need to stress test how that's going to work. But you definitely want to give the buyer's assurance that you've done the thinking about these things, that you've planned for them as much as you can. Many of the results of some of these things are unknowable to us at the moment, but it's important that you can evidence to the buyer that you've at least thought about them. The old saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So at least having some plans in place and some various options would likely give your buyers confidence that you are an appropriate supplier or contractor to win their multi-year contract, and that you're going to be able to see it through. One final thing I'd like to talk about now is to do with resources for bids. It's likely that we're starting to see some evidence of this, a real upsurge in the amount of contracts coming out to tender. So how are you going to perhaps manage to resource all of these if they perhaps all come together? Many come at the one time. So you might want to think about, this is maybe where you want to think about having contingency arrangements in place, including access to perhaps bid specialists, additional bid resources. So you'll find more information about the things I've been talking about today on our company website. The company is AMBid, and the website is www.ambid.co.uk. You can also follow me, both myself, Andrew Morrison, and the business AM Bid on LinkedIn, where we regularly provide a lot of expert views on successful bidding and tendering, both to the public and the private sectors. I hope that you've enjoyed this first LinkedIn Live that I've done. I look forward to doing many more. And thank you very much for either tuning in or for watching the recording of this.